My parents ran a lifetime approval system where every gift I received was technically a loan and my sibling was the only one never expected to repay anything. I didn't realize my parents had been keeping a ledger on me until I was 28 years old. By then, I had already paid them thousands of dollars. I just didn't know it. The discovery started with a phone call from my mother. She sounded irritated, not angry, not emotional, just annoyed, like I had forgotten to return a library book. "You still owe us for the laptop." I laughed because I genuinely thought she was joking. "What laptop?" "The one we bought you for college." I waited for the punchline. It never came. "I graduated 6 years ago. That doesn't erase the debt." The word debt hit me so hard I thought I had misheard her. I asked what she was talking about. She told me they had covered a large portion of the laptop's cost and expected reimbursement. I reminded her it had been a birthday gift. She corrected me immediately. No, it was assistance. That conversation lasted maybe 4 minutes, but it changed how I viewed my entire childhood, because once I started thinking about it, strange memories began resurfacing. Things that had never made sense, things I had ignored because they were normal in my family. Growing up, my younger brother, Ethan, always got more than I did. I know every older sibling says that, but this wasn't the usual jealousy. It was measurable. When I got a used bicycle, Ethan got a new one. When I received a basic phone, Ethan got the newest model. When relatives gave us money, my parents somehow convinced me to save mine while Ethan spent his freely. The explanation was always the same. "You're more responsible." As a kid, that sounded like a compliment. As an adult, I realized it was a system, a very carefully designed system. After the laptop conversation, I called my father. I expected him to tell me Mom had exaggerated. Instead, he doubled down. He said adulthood required accountability. He said they had invested heavily in me. He said children should appreciate sacrifices. Then he mentioned another number, a specific number, $300. I asked what it referred to. He said it was part of the balance remaining from my first car. I nearly dropped my phone. The car had been a graduation present, or at least that's what everyone had called it. Family members, friends, even my parents. Now suddenly it was debt. I asked how much I supposedly owed altogether. There was a pause. Then my father said something that made my stomach twist. I'd have to check the records. Records, not memory, not estimates. Records that meant documentation, tracking, accounting for gifts. That night I barely slept. The next morning I called my aunt, my mother's sister. She had always been more honest than the rest of the family. I told her about the conversation. Silence. Long silence. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "You finally found out?" I sat up immediately. "Found out what?" Another pause. Then she sighed. "I thought they told you years ago." My chest tightened. "Told me what?" "They've been keeping accounts on you since you were little." I felt physically sick. She explained that she had seen notebooks years earlier, spreadsheets too. Every expense associated with me was tracked. Birthday gifts, school supplies, sports equipment, holiday presents, everything. At first I thought she was exaggerating, then she said something worse. "They never did that with Ethan." I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Not with Ethan, only me. The next weekend I drove to my parents' house. I told them we needed to talk. My mother seemed irritated before I even sat down. My father looked defensive. That alone told me everything. People don't get defensive over things they haven't done. I asked directly whether they kept financial records on me. My father admitted it immediately, like it was completely reasonable. He even seemed proud of it. He said the system taught responsibility. I asked if they tracked Ethan's expenses too. My mother answered before he could. "No." Just one word, no hesitation, no embarrassment, nothing. I stared at her. "Why not?" She exchanged a glance with Dad. That glance still haunts me because it wasn't confusion, it was coordination, like they had discussed this question before. Finally, my father spoke. "Ethan needed more support." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Ethan was 30 years old. He still lived in a condo my parents paid for. He drove a truck they bought. He worked part-time by choice. And somehow I was the one who needed lessons about responsibility. I asked to see the records. My father refused. That refusal became the first major crack in their story. If the system was fair and educational, why hide it? Why not show me? The argument exploded. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Eventually I left. But I wasn't done. Something felt wrong, not unfair. Wrong, like there was another layer beneath everything. A few weeks later my grandmother died. The timing couldn't have been stranger. We gathered for the funeral. Family members flew in from different states. Tensions were already high, then something happened that changed everything. My aunt approached me privately. She handed me a small envelope. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this." I looked inside. There was a key and an address. Apparently my grandmother had maintained a storage unit for years. Nobody knew why. At least that's what everyone claimed. The following Saturday I went alone. The unit wasn't large, just a few boxes, old furniture, photo albums, paperwork, lots of paperwork. I almost left after 20 minutes. Then I found a cardboard file box labeled family. Inside were dozens of folders, tax records, letters, bank statements, and one folder with my name written across the front. My hand started shaking. I opened it. What I found explained everything, and nothing. The folder contained copies of ledger sheets, actual ledger sheets, my father's handwriting, dates, descriptions, amounts, every dollar spent on me. It started when I was 6 years old, Christmas presents, school clothes, field trips, birthday parties, everything. The entries stretched across decades, thousands upon thousands of dollars. At the very bottom was a handwritten total, an amount so ridiculous I thought it was a joke. According to my father, I owed over $80,000 for existing. I sat there staring at the page. Then I noticed something odd. Several sheets referenced trust distributions. I had never heard of any trust, not once. The documents listed transfers associated with my name, large transfers, far larger than any gifts my parents had ever given me. I started digging deeper. The trust references appeared repeatedly. Then I found correspondence between my grandmother and an attorney. The letters changed everything, because the trust wasn't created by my parents. It was created by my grandfather, before he died. Specifically for me, not Ethan, me. I read every document 3 times. My grandfather had established an education and development trust. The funds were intended to support my upbringing, education, and future opportunities. The value was substantial, much larger than I expected. The trust had paid out over the years, for school, for activities, for college-related expenses, for things my parents constantly claimed they had sacrificed to provide. Suddenly, a horrifying possibility formed in my head. I drove straight to my aunt's house. She helped me contact the attorney listed in the documents, retired now, but still alive. 2 days later, we met. I brought copies of everything. The attorney reviewed them carefully. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. My parents had been reimbursed by the trust for many of the expenses they tracked as debts against me. I asked him to repeat that. He did. Slowly. My parents weren't paying for many of those things. The trust was the laptop, the car, tuition assistance, activities, trips. Numerous expenses had already been funded. Yet somehow they still appeared in the ledger as debts I owed them. I felt like reality was collapsing. All those years, all those lectures, all those guilt trips, all those reminders about sacrifice. And much of it had already been paid, by money intended specifically for me. I thought that was the worst part. It wasn't. The attorney continued reviewing documents. Then he found another detail, one that explained Ethan. The trust originally had 2 beneficiaries, not one. Both children, me and Ethan. I frowned. That contradicted everything. Then he showed me an amendment. A legal amendment executed years later, after my grandfather's death. The amendment removed Ethan as a beneficiary. The reason was attached. I still remember reading the sentence. Funds previously allocated to Ethan have been exhausted through repeated discretionary withdrawals requested by parents. I felt dizzy. My parents had drained Ethan's portion years earlier, then redirected their focus toward mine. Suddenly, every piece fit together. Why Ethan never had to repay anything, why I carried the burden, why every dollar spent on me became a debt, because they couldn't access unlimited trust money anymore. They needed justification, control, a way to preserve what remained. And apparently that way was convincing me I owed them for everything. The more records we uncovered, the uglier it became. My parents had presented trust-funded expenses as personal sacrifices. They had used my own inheritance to finance portions of my upbringing, then recorded those same expenses as obligations. It wasn't just manipulation, it felt like theft. I confronted them 3 weeks later. This time I brought copies, every document, every ledger, every trust statement. The moment my father saw the papers, his face changed. Not confusion, recognition. He knew exactly what they were. My mother started crying almost immediately, not out of guilt, out of panic. The conversation lasted 4 hours. For the first hour, they denied everything. Then they blamed misunderstandings, then accounting mistakes, then family pressure. Finally, the truth started emerging, not all at once, piece by piece. According to them, my grandfather never trusted their financial decisions. He believed they favored Ethan. He worried they would overspend on him, so he structured the trust carefully. After his death, Ethan's portion disappeared much faster than anticipated. My parents justified it by saying Ethan struggled socially. Emotionally, academically, every withdrawal had a reason, every expense seemed necessary. But eventually the money ran low. That's when resentment started. At least according to my mother, she admitted they began viewing my trust differently, not as mine, as family money. Something everyone deserved, something I was selfish for having, even though I had never known it existed. My father finally admitted the ledger served another purpose, a purpose he had never told anyone. The debts weren't merely records. They were leverage, insurance, a way to ensure I remained connected to the family, dependent on family approval, grateful, obligated, controlled. The room went silent after that, because once spoken aloud, it sounded exactly as awful as it was. Suddenly, decades of memories rearranged themselves. Every guilt trip, every lecture, every reminder, every conversation about responsibility. They weren't teaching values, they were maintaining a system. A system where I could never fully repay what I supposedly owed. A system where they remained creditors and I remained indebted. Emotionally, financially, psychologically. The realization hurt more than the money because money can be recovered, trust can't. I asked them one question, the question that mattered most. If I never found those documents, would you have told me? Neither answered. That silence was my answer. Over the next year, everything unraveled. Lawyers became involved. Accountants reviewed records. Family members took sides. Some defended my parents. Others were horrified. The final financial outcome wasn't as dramatic as people expect. Most of the transactions existed in legal gray areas. Proving intent was difficult. Recovering funds was even harder. But that wasn't the biggest consequence. The biggest consequence was exposure. The family finally saw the truth, not just the trust. The favoritism, the manipulation, the approval system, the invisible rules that had governed our lives. Ethan struggled with the revelations too. For years I blamed him. I thought he benefited knowingly. I thought he enjoyed special treatment. The reality was more complicated. He had been manipulated differently, protected to the point of dependency, shielded from consequences until he couldn't function independently. He wasn't the architect. He was another product of the system, just on the opposite side. We spent months talking, comparing memories, piecing together the truth. For the first time in our lives, we stopped competing. We started understanding each other. That might be the only good thing that came from all this. Today, I have very limited contact with my parents. Birthdays, major holidays, occasional updates, nothing more. Sometimes my mother still tries to revive the old dynamic. She'll mention sacrifices or obligations or everything they've done for me. Then she remembers. She remembers I know, and the conversation changes. The strangest part is that I still catch myself feeling guilty sometimes. That's what decades of conditioning does. Even after discovering the truth, part of me still feels like I owe someone something. Then I remember the ledger, I remember the trust, I remember the hidden records, and I remind myself of something important. Parents aren't supposed to keep score. They're not supposed to hand you gifts while secretly calculating future repayment. They're not supposed to turn love into debt. The final thing I found in my grandmother's storage unit was a letter. It was written by my grandfather shortly before his death. I didn't read it until months later. The last paragraph explained everything better than any lawyer ever could. He wrote that money wasn't the inheritance. Freedom was. The purpose of the trust was to give his grandchildren opportunities without burdens, without guilt, without obligation, without control. Reading those words broke me. Because for most of my life, the people entrusted to protect that freedom had transformed it into chains. And the cruelest part wasn't that they took the money. It was that they convinced me I owed them for taking it. For 28 years, I thought I was failing to repay a debt. What I was really doing was carrying a burden that never existed. And once I finally put it down, I realized how heavy it had been all along.